So hello and welcome everybody to our first ever Pie Day, the Shaker Pie Way. This is a celebration of pies, both mathematical and baked, and we are so excited to share our pies with you all today. A reminder that this is being broadcast live to the Shaker Historical Society Facebook page and on the Shaker Pie Way shared event that all of our lovely bakers, intrepid bakers, have shared with our communities today. So this will be recorded and will be available for years to come. So if you missed it today, or if you're watching this pre-recorded, feel free to, still ask comments down below. And if you have any questions or comments as we are talking during this live stream, feel free to comment them in the Zoom chat if you're joining us through Zoom, or in the Facebook comments. We will all be able to see those as well. So a brief introduction of everyone in our organizations before we get started on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. At least it's beautiful here in Northeast Ohio. My name is Allison Henline, and I am the Education and Outreach Manager at the Shaker Historical Society in Shaker Heights, Ohio. And we're the ones that are kind of emceeing the event today. I'm also joined by Sharon Kumler of the Shaker Museum at Mount Lebanon, that's in New York, and Johanna Batman, which she is the director of the Shaker Heritage Society, also located in New York, and Shirley Vida, who is the director of the Enfield Shaker Museum, which is located in New Hampshire. So we have all prepared a historic pie recipe for this joyous occasion today. And although I don't know if there's any bad occasion for pies, we all love to enjoy a nice good pie. We have also created a brief presentation about our individual historic institutions and prepared a brief overview of pie-related historical topics that interest us. And we hope that you find all of our little discussions and our panels very interesting and engaging. And I have been selected as the MC for this event. So before I get started with my presentation, I just wanted everybody to kind of introduce themselves and, say what they were about. So just quickly, if everyone wanted to say hello.
Hello. Hello.
Okay.
I'm really a volunteer at the Shaker Museum. I was an employee some time ago, but I never really let go. So when this opportunity came, I was thrilled to participate.
It's awesome.
I'm Johanna Batman. I've been at Shaker Heritage for about 2.5 years now, so long enough that I can't claim ignorance anymore, but still learning every day. So I'm also really excited to share and learn from everyone at the table today.
So, and I'm Shirley Vida from Enfield Shaker Museum. I've been here about 1.5 years now. It's been an exciting journey so far, and I like pie. So there we are.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so as I introduced myself, I'm Allison Henline. I'm with the Shaker Historical Society in Shaker Heights, Ohio, and I've been with my museum for a little under a year. I started last July, so I'm still very new to all of this. So I'm very thankful to be included in this, and I'm excited for this whole panel and discussion. So I'm going to, without further ado, get into my presentation real quick. So let me share my screen. Let's figure out how to do that real quick. There we go. Okay, so you should be able to see my screen here. So we will do present. Okay, so you may have seen this lovely graphic on our shared Instagrams, Twitters, Facebooks, things of that nature. We actually have been putting this together. This came together pretty quickly. So I, again, thank everybody who's been involved in this so far, and thank my wonderful co-hosts today for including us and getting us all together. I think this is a cool little thing that we're doing. So what about my historical society? So I represent the Shaker Historical Society, which is a nonprofit organization that was established in 1947 to provide stewardship for our region's significant history by nurturing respectful discovery, preservation of collections, and public dissemination of the history, traditions, and heritage of the Shaker sect, Shaker Heights, Warrensville Township, and the surrounding areas. And the home of the Shaker Historical Society, as you can see here in this beautiful photograph, is situated on the grounds of the former North Union Center family's apple orchard and vegetable garden. And it was the former home of Lewis Myers, a real estate agent for the Van Swearingen Company, and his wife, Blanche. From the Myers Mansion, we operate a museum, public research library, archive, art gallery, local gift shop, and community garden beds. So we have a lot going on. And our mission, of course, is to inspire people to engage in the celebration of Shaker Heights' story and its impact on the region, past, present, and future. So a little bit more about us. We have a couple of cool stuff that we have going on. We do a lot of events and programming. We offer a variety of programming and opportunities at SHS. We are the historic hub for all things Shaker, not necessarily the Shakers, but including the Shakers, but also for Shaker Heights residents, who we call Shaker residents, including our school age camps and programmings, adult speaker series, and various workshops that are sure to interest and engage all members of the community. We offer memberships, volunteer opportunities for adults and youths, educational programming for all ages, and we also have a variety of virtual programming available, such as this. And for those near and far, whether you're in Shaker Heights or if you're coming to us from another location anywhere on the globe, we have a couple of cool virtual exhibits, one of them being Shaker's Attic, which is listed here, which was actually curated and put together by Hazel Smith, who is our junior board member. So she's just a stellar human being. You should definitely check that out. You can find all this information on our website, shakerhistory.org. So now on to the cool stuff. So I have done a lot about historic recipes in modern kitchens, and I find it very interesting and also kind of a trial, and I'm sure everyone else here can agree that it is a trial to recreate historic recipes in a modern or contemporary kitchen. You know, we don't have to build fires in our stoves anymore, although fires may sometimes happen in ovens. They are often not intentional, as they once were, to heat and to bake things. But a couple of things that I had gone over when I was putting this presentation together was, you know, a lot of the historic recipes that we see mention, you know, temperatures. So I'm going to talk a little bit about different aspects of historic recipes and how to recreate them in a modern kitchen, as well as my process making the pie that I chose today. So I'm going to be discussing this topic a little bit more in depth, but of course, this is a brief overview. I am not a baker. I am a historian. I am not in any way a cook, a baker, any sort of person that is comfortable, or I'm barely adequate in the kitchen. I can make things that are edible, sometimes tasty. Sometimes those things combine and they're edible and tasty. But today I'm going to be talking about this. So first off, heats and temperatures. You may have seen this if you've ever tried to recreate a historic recipe, low or slow oven, or, you know, any of these other variants that I have listed here. In my research that I've done, and I'm sure that the other bakers here will kind of agree that there's a variety of different temperatures that could be for any of these. I think that the medium moderate oven is the one with the most variation, because I've seen it as low as 325 and I've seen it as high as 400. But I kind of took the average of that in the spirit of Pi Day, and, you know, being mathematical, I decided to take the averages of all of the ones that I had found in all of my research and kind of narrow them down to a closer range. That's a range oven joke. Wow. I don't know why I said that. Anyways, so the moderate oven is where I ended up baking my pie. The recipe that I had listed, and this is a little bit of a foreshadowing, was listed for 350 degrees, which ended up being a little too low. But there's a lot of things you have to kind of think about variables, right? So even though something says a medium or a moderate oven, you think, oh, you know, maybe 365 is going to be adequate, or even if it lists 350, that's an interpretation, right? Everybody's ovens are different. Everybody has a different, you know, fire that was once burning in there. Everybody has a different, you know, range oven, whether it's gas, electric, anything. So it varies per recipe. So my biggest tip to anybody that wants to recreate a historic recipe in a modern kitchen: use your common sense. If you have never baked before, maybe try baking something not historic before you jump into a historic recipe. A pizza hot oven, so something that you would cook a pizza in, you know, temperature wise, is not the same as something you would consider a hot oven for a cupcake recipe. You know, pizza ovens are typically 450 degrees plus. I mean, and sometimes as hot as you can get an oven or a space. Whereas a cupcake oven, you know, if you get that hot, it's going to flash burn. So, you know, common sense with using temperatures and heating. So the next one that I have is actually something really interesting to me, at least, is historic ingredients and flavors. And I actually had a conversation with Shirley about this, and I'm sure she might cover a little bit of this in her presentation. So I hope we don't overlap too much. But there was a huge transition, especially in historic recipes, from dry spices to liquid spice, or more contemporary spices we know now as like vanilla flavoring or, you know, vanilla extract. A lot of the recipes that I had done research on, not necessarily for this pie day, but also for other research that I've done at the museum, a lot of them tend to include spices that we wouldn't normally associate with a modern palate. And what I mean by that is I personally don't really use nutmeg outside of a pumpkin pie recipe or outside of a, you know, apple pie recipe. But I had made cookies, or not cookies, I made cupcakes, muffins, a few months ago using a historic recipe from my great grandmother, and it included nutmeg in it as the only spice. The only spice was nutmeg, and there was 2 tablespoons of freshly ground nutmeg. And I was just, that is such an odd flavor. And it has a certain flavor profile, but it's something that I had never considered as something as a historic recipe. But as I got more into the weeds of researching, of course, you uncover a lot more about spice trading and changes in availability of goods. So there's a lot of changes, especially when you're talking about shortening and ingredients of that sort of nature. So the shortening in fats, maybe you've seen recipes from your own family that mention oleo, or, you know, maybe another type of brand name or branding. It's the lexicon, right? So these are targeted advertisements towards bakers, home chefs, home cooks that were targeted advertisements that became part of the lexicon. So even though oleo is what we consider margarine shortening nowadays, a lot of recipes don't mention it as margarine. They mention it as oleo. I have a lot of handwritten recipes from my grandmother that just say oleo, and it took me a while to figure out what oleo was. Of course, you know, maybe that's just me, but it's important to note those when you're looking at historic recipes to kind of figure out what that is and what the modern equivalent of that might be. I've also seen shaker recipes that mention suet. Beef suet is obviously a rendered down fat from the processing of meat that comes from a cow, so beef, and it's typically a reusable shortening. So it's something that maybe they were making a stew, or when they were cutting stuff up for a larger meal, they would have reused the suet and rendered it down to make, you know, any sort of flavor profile you'd like. It's not very common nowadays, but back then, you know, waste not, want not. You want to keep using anything you can and be as frugal as you can without buying any new things. And again, of course, changes in availability of goods, dry goods, wet goods, anything like that you can think of. So my favorite aspect of this, and something I had studied when I was doing my master's degree, is material culture and foodways. So family history and foodways, especially when you're thinking about preserving those traditional dishes, those traditional meals that you might have. There's a lot of personal and family histories that come along with recipes. Of course, like I said earlier, there's really no bad day for a pie, but you might have a certain pie a certain time of year that might align with either a harvest or maybe a celebration or a birthday or an event. Maybe there's a wedding, or, you know, and not in the shaker's case, but maybe there is a birthday or some sort of special celebration that happens. And you might have different meals and different, you know, baked goods that you have to celebrate those joyous events. So there's a lot of personal history that gets lost in these, that, you know, maybe they didn't include any utensils that they might have used. Maybe there was a special form or a special way in which that you create a pie, a cookie, a dish that, you know, maybe is just common knowledge to the person who made the recipe, but is not common knowledge to somebody who finds the recipe. That is a huge thing, you know, nowadays when we're looking back at older recipes, you know, that mention a cup. A cup is not a standard unit of measurement like we know it today. A cup could have been, you know, a teacup. It could have been some object that just held an ingredient enough that that was what was considered a cup or a half a cup. And I found that out personally with my own grandmother's recipe. She had this apparently a tin cup that had crude measurements written on the side that were etched in by hand by her, and that cup has since been lost. And we have no idea what the modern equivalent of it is. So you just kind of have to make your best guess with the liquid and dry good measurements for all of these things. And it's all about trial and error. We had mentioned right before we got on this live talk that, you know, some of us had really good turnout for our pies, some of us didn't. So it's all about trial and error. Don't be afraid to try something new. Don't be afraid to, you know, keep getting it wrong, because it's all learning, right? You're unlikely to make the same mistake twice. If you do, you know, you learn from that and you move forward with it. So my encouraging words to everyone is just to keep trying. It's all in the fun, and, you know, eventually you'll get there. So I just think it's really important, again, to make sure that you have all of these, that you just keep trying it out and make sure that you're keeping up with the traditional things. So again, this brings us to the preservation of recipes. So without going any over my time, I kind of want to get to my apple pie as well. Preservation of recipes, I'm just going to kind of briefly go through this. Recipes come in many different forms: cookbooks, cards, scrapbooks. If you have any of these lying around at your, you know, house, or maybe your grandparents' house or at a relative's house, and you don't want to lose these recipes because you want to, you know, maintain that flavor profile, those family traditions, make sure you try your best efforts to digitize them and to preserve them for longevity so that future generations can utilize them. Again, these are some very best practices for cookbooks and recipe cards and all of this, but digitization is a huge thing, especially with older things that might deteriorate over time. Acid-free as much as you can. You don't have to go for the archival stuff. Amazon sells acid-free folders and things like that. So just make sure that if you're using any of these things, to store them properly. And I'm sure that any of the organizations that are talking today would be good resources for you if you just wanted to get started in digitizing and preserving your family's history. More information, again, reach out to your local historical society or your library. Your local library will have somebody that can help you with this. Again, start the process sooner rather than later if you can. It oftentimes entails a long process, and it's something that, you know, is very daunting to a lot of people, but the sooner you do it, the sooner, you know, you can preserve those memories. Involve your family and ask questions of your family and your friends to get more context for that. And, you know, if you do decide to either donate, or if you want to preserve these memories of cookbooks and other artifacts, that provenance, that context is very important to get those memories. And then don't be afraid to ask for help. We're here to help you. I know that everybody on this call today is a historian, or by trade or by training. So please reach out to any of us on the call, or anybody in your local community that has any sort of experience with this. We'd be happy to help you. So quickly, I'm going to go through my pie. So I chose a pie from this cookbook, which I brought home. It is the Shaker Cookbook, Not by Bread Alone, by Caroline Piercy. This is the 1970s version of this book. There are a couple different volumes, I think. I wanted to start off by showcasing our apple peeler and corer. The North Union Shakers were very well known for their apple orchards. They had a lot of them. They had a lot of apples. And the Shakers actually invented the apple peeler and corer. And as you can see on the left, that is my mother's apple and peeler and corer. I did not use this historical artifact for this one, although that one probably could be considered a historical artifact with how old it is. They invented it, and it is they being the Shakers have invented the apple peeler and corer. And so we thought it best to utilize that practice when making this apple pie. So I made the North Union Crust, which is also a recipe listed in this book. That is unique to the North Union Shakers, which is where Shaker Heights, Ohio is nowadays. They used to live on that land. So the North Union Crust is the recipe. It's pretty much a similar pie crust to anything you've ever made. I had to cut in cold butter. I ended up using a box grater so that would go faster, and it did. Highly recommend anybody making that. Box grater, freeze your butter and then just grate it in. So easy. It was very vague recipe though. There wasn't, I just said handle as little as possible. And I was like, okay, well, I need to form this into something because it was a very shaggy dough. So that's how I ended up doing it in the bowl there. And then perforating the bottom. It did not mention perforating the bottom, but my mother reminded me that if I didn't do that, it was going to be no go. So this is the assembly. As you can see, I did not have this book in the kitchen when I was making this. I made a copy of the pages that I was going to need, and I printed it out and used that in the kitchen, so that way I wasn't using a book from our library in it. So make copies of your recipes so that way if it gets dirt on it or sugar or anything, you can just throw that away when you're done. This is the assembly of it. Not my bet. I'm not a baker, like I said before, so please don't judge me too fiercely on that. And then this is my finished product. So the recipe actually made 2 pies. I tried out 2 different types. So the left is actually a fully covered pie that I cut slits in. And then on the right, obviously, it was my very poor attempt at doing lattice work, which ended up not actually doing a full lattice because I ran out of pie dough. So what went well, the crust recipe was really, really delicate and tender. And I'm going to show you that during our pie reveal. So stay tuned for the pie reveal. Even better if it had tools listed. There were no tools listed, and the temperature time was not accurate. It ended up taking me 2.5 hours to bake these pies. And even though they still appear blonde in these pictures, it was just a very low temperature oven and it needed a lot more time. So that is my presentation. I'm sorry I went a little bit over. I apologize to everybody else, but these are my sources and anything. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me at education@shakerhistory.org, and I will make this recipe available as well after this presentation is over too. So without further ado, I do believe right after me is, double check here, Sharon.
Well, that was amazing. Let's see, you're going to stop sharing though first, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I have to say, my grandmother, my great grandmother, was a great baker, and she measured in her hand. And I tried really hard to learn how to do that. I still use measuring equipment, but I loved all of the detail that you brought. Anyway, I'm representing the Shaker Museum today, and it is a great time for the museum as they enter their 71st year of operation this year. The museum was founded by John S. Williams Sr. on his farm in Old Chatham, New York. He collected broadly from living shakers, from other places, and it was great because the museum now holds a remarkable collection. There's the museum as it sits in Old Chatham. But we have a remarkable collection of shaker objects and manuscripts, a collection that is so broad in its scope, and it represents most shaker sites, that it really gives us a chance to share shaker history from a national perspective. The museum has outgrown its space in Old Chatham, and in recent years, the board has investigated a variety of options for relocation, including acquiring the North family property at Mount Lebanon. While work continues in that landscape, the museum has now also acquired a building in Chatham, New York. And this building it's an industrial building, as you can probably tell, and it has not been used in quite a long time. But we've been working with Seldorf architects to renovate the building, and will ultimately move the museum's collection and the galleries to Chatham. Design plans were just approved by the Village Planning Board last month, and construction drawings are in the next phase of the project. So we encourage you to stay tuned for that. It's going to be a great experience for the museum, but also for Chatham. But I love pie. I love both the kind that we eat and the mathematical pie. You know, pi, let's see, it's 2 pi r, the formula for the circumference of a circle. Or if you want to know the area of a circle, it's pi r squared. I was a math major, and I have no idea why any of this is interesting, except I've always wondered, is that why we call pies pies? Anyway, for me, having to decide what kind of a pie and then just choosing one was really hard. I did spend some time in the museum's library and in some manuscripts looking for recipes, but ultimately I went to a cookbook by Sister Frances Carr from Sabbath Day Lake Community in Maine. I'll talk more about that in a minute. I did also find plenty of photographs of shaker kitchens with women who generally were the ones doing the cooking. This is a 19th century image at Mount Lebanon. And here are a couple of images of Sister Marie on the left and Sister Frances on the right at Sabbath Day Lake during the 20th century. And I also found this table full of pies in the church family dwelling at Hancock Shaker Village. I've done the count, it's 12 or 13 pies. And I know the family was large, but I think they also really enjoyed pie. But we so often think about pie as a dessert. Pie has a much more prominent place at the table, though. There are at least 4 types of pie, if you think about it: cream pie, fruit pie, custard pies, and savory pies. Pie can be served at every single meal. Think about an egg and a cheese pie stuffed with your favorite herbs and vegetables, maybe for breakfast, or a savory ham pie for lunch. I think about a ham and cheese wrapped inside of a lovely flaky crust, or a calzone all tomatoey and cheesy. How about a comforting pie, a chicken pot pie for dinner, and then finish off your dinner with your favorite fruit pie. My favorite fruit pie is the middle of the summer tart cherry pie with fresh picked cherries. Early pies were predominantly meat pies, appearing in England as early as the 12th century. The crust of a pie was referred to as the coffin, and typically there's more crust than filling. We have a new traditional pie maker in the town of Chatham, and somebody remarked recently that his pies are very heavy on the crust. In doing some research for this program, it occurred to me that that is why his pies are so heavy on the crust, because he is making traditional pies. Fruit pies, or tarts, were first made in the 1500s, and English tradition credits the first cherry pie to Queen Elizabeth I. Pie came to America with the first English settlers. Over the years, pie has become the most traditional American dessert. It's become so much a part of American culture that we all say it's American. It's as American as apple pie, which, by the way, is the most popular pie in America. But back to my pies. I chose to make 2, and the first one is a custard pie. That recipe came from Shaker Your Plate of Shaker Cooks and Cooking, and you'll find it on page 126 in both editions of these cookbooks. There are so many pies to choose from in Shaker cookbooks and manuscripts, but I mostly chose this one because of a notation that accompanies the recipe. It's right under the recipe, and it says, "This recipe came to Sister Mildred with the electric light bill. Recipes like this tend to soften the blow of the bill." Well, that made me think about my growing up years and my mother, who was a baker from the get-go, and she taught me to bake at the very beginning. But Mom got her recipes from newspapers, magazines, and the utility bills, just like this. So in thinking that Sister Mildred also had this habit, it made this feel a lot more familiar to me. I also started thinking of another research project about how this shift in the change from an oral tradition of sharing recipes went to a more published one from newspapers and magazines and utility bills. My second pie choice became more problematic. I found this manuscript piece. It's Sister Lizzy's Shaker Sugar Pie. Sister Lizzy was a shaker at South Union, Kentucky, and this is credited with coming from South Union, although I could not find clear provenance for that. But this is truly one of those pies that you would make when all the apples are gone, the berries haven't begun to ripen, and there's really nothing more than flour, sugar, cream, and butter in the kitchen. I've seen such pies talked about as desperation pies. Late winter and early spring certainly meant that your cows had calved, so there was plenty of milk to make cream, or well, to have cream and to make butter. But even in this time of the year, the rhubarb hadn't even begun to sprout, so there was little left for pie making. For me, though, the real problem came from 2 other things. When I went to make the pie, it's just flour, butter, sugar, and some light cream. No eggs in it, which is fine, but I didn't think about the pie rising. So what happened during the baking of this pie was that it rose up, excuse me, and spilled over, so much so that I set the smoke alarms off in our house probably half a dozen times before the pie was done baking. We'll see how it turns out when we do the pie reveal. But I also then found it in the Best of Shaker Cooking, and it's on page 269. But the measurements between those two pies varied. One of them had a quarter cup of butter and a half a cup of flour. The other one had the reverse, a half a cup of butter and a quarter cup of flour. So I made the one from the manuscript. And I probably will try the other someday just to see what the difference is. But it was quite a challenge understanding that as we write down our recipes, that you make sure that you do as accurate a recording as possible. But then I also am aware of those times when we share recipes, and I know people have been known to leave out that special ingredient or that one extra step that might challenge the finished product. Anyway, it was all an adventure and I really loved participating in it. And don't worry, Allison, I was a little bit short, so we're still on time. So now, Johanna, it is your turn.
Well, thank you. This is lovely. All right, let's see if I'm capable of sharing my screen. All right, and I hope this is working for everyone. All right, so I am very pleased to share my pie baking experience from Watervliet. So a little bit about the history of our site. This is a view of Watervliet today. So we are the original Shaker settlement in America. So Mother Ann Lee, with I think 12 of her first followers, settled here in 1776. And this site was continuously occupied until 1938. So it had a long and varied history. And you can see that the landscape is maybe not what you would expect with a Shaker village. It's a much more kind of open, airy little oasis in the kind of middle of Albany. But in the foreground here, I'll point out our Shaker herb garden, which is lovingly maintained by a volunteer corps that we call the Shaker Buds. And they care for this garden of over 150 herbs and plants. The medicinal herb business was a very important economic driver in Watervliet. And in the background, you can see the 1915 Shaker barn, which is actually one of the newest structures on the property and was constructed after the previous barn complex was burned down in an act of arson, which unfortunately was a pretty common issue among Shaker villages. So here is a lovely 1938 map of the property. So you can see it was a really tight little urban development in many ways. And this was created by David Austin Buckingham, who's one of the great journalists of the community. And just for reference, here this little shadow is the sisters' stone shop. And the herb garden that you saw actually rests in the foundation where that shop used to be. So this is the former barn complex. So you could see we were looking across the Shaker Creek. And I also want to point out that we still have the remnants of the historic apple orchard. Apple pie, I understand, was almost ubiquitous at Shaker tables. But today our apples are actually used for cider production by Nine Pin Cider. So we're looking forward to the debut of the next season's Shaker cider in the coming months. Here's a view about 40 years later of Watervliet. So this is during kind of the post-Civil War decline in membership among the communities. But for reference again, here shadowed is the Sisters Stone Workshop. And this site was really radically transformed in the 20th century. So as the community shrank, there were 4 families that then started to close one by one. And in 1924, when the Church family closed, the property was sold. And the individual who bought it turned around and sold it again about a year later to Albany County, who remain our landlords at Shaker Heritage Society today. They still own the property. And they used it for a number of really kind of innovative social projects. They built the first municipal airport right across the street. So if you kind of look past the dwelling house at the end of the drive in this photo today, there's an airport with a little screen of trees, fortunately. Additionally, there was a model municipal jail facility built. And then most impactful for the church family site was the construction of the Ann Lee Nursing Home, which was the first municipally operated nursing home in Albany. And it directly replaced the almshouse model of care. So at that point, there was a radical reimagining of the property. And unfortunately, the stone workshop, the sisters' workshop, where they would have processed herbs and seeds for the medicinal herb business and the seed industry, that was pulled down along with every single wood frame structure on the property, over 20 buildings, except for this one, the 1848 meeting house, which today is really kind of the jewel of our museum. So this is a shot of the interior. And this building had many subsequent lives. It was a community center, briefly a movie theater, and a Catholic chapel for many decades. But today you can see it's been restored. The floors are replacement and the peg rails were reinstalled, but virtually everything else was left intact, which was really a blessing given the radical changes that the site has undergone. So on to the recipe. For Pie Day today, I chose a recipe from the book of Lavinia Ducha of the Watervliet community. And this book is currently in the collection of Hancock Shaker Village, and they very graciously allowed us to scan and save a copy of it. A little bit about Lavinia. We don't know a lot about her, but she was born in 1830, and she actually was a resident of the Groveland community initially. And that was a shorter-lived community in Western New York State. And when it closed in 1892, she moved along with many of her sisters, her Shaker sisters, to Watervliet. And there are a few mentions of her in the journals, but one of my favorites I came across was from the journals of Anna Gopper, who kept the Watervliet journals at the South family in some of the last years of the community. And in 1921, Anna noted that Lavinia eats raw onions every night for supper and beans when she can get them. This accounts for her cheerful, happy disposition and longevity, as she is now 90 years old and still on deck, able to clean her room and bathe herself and make her bed. So after reading about Lavinia's dietary preferences, I had some reservations about the quality of her recipes for pie, but I decided to forge ahead. And I didn't include here, but there's another really sweet entry, only about 2 months after this one in 1921, where Anna notes that Lavinia has kind of taken a turn for the worse and has been feeling quite poorly. And in fact, her health was always described as somewhat frail. But she apparently reported that if she were to just give up and go to bed, that she would die within 6 weeks, but she wasn't going to do it. And indeed, she did persevere and live for another 2 years after that. So somewhat to my surprise, the only pie recipe that I could find in this volume was for mock mince pie, which is kind of an difficult choice because it's almost like the super villain of the dessert world, like right there along with fruitcake. There are desserts that seem to be foisted upon unsuspecting guests around holidays that no one really likes, but everyone feels obligated to make. But not having actually ever eaten a mincemeat pie or a mock mince pie, I did a little bit of research, and Sharon touched on a lot of this, but tarts of flesh appear in very early recipe accounts, a predecessor perhaps of what we understand to be a mincemeat pie today. And really that thick pastry crust probably started out as sort of a preservation technique. So you mix your meat, and in this case, fruit and spices, and seal it in a pastry. And then actually through vents in the top, you can pour in more hot fat and suet and lard and things like that. And it almost like a duck confit, where you're preserving your meat in the fat to seal out oxygen and prevent decomposition. You apparently could store these in a cool place for months and still eat them without dying of some horrible gastrointestinal distress. Other mentions of mincemeat controversy in history books include an assertion that under the reign of Oliver Cromwell in England that mincemeat pies were banned. From what I can tell, that's not exactly true, but they were associated with celebration and feasting, particularly around religious holidays, which was seen in a kind of Protestant lens as, popish and in a very, negative association with Catholicism, and it should be a stern and solemn observation of holiday. But as I said, I can't find any evidence that they were ever really banned. Another effort to ban mincemeat took place in the Prohibition era in the United States in Chicago. And many traditional mincemeat pies are made with a significant quantity of brandy. And there were some assertions that perhaps bakers were putting a little extra brandy into their mincemeat pies to kind of sweeten the deal. But again, the efforts to ban mincemeat were destined to fail. And it seems that the advent of American pie being apples really is a 20th century innovation. And before that, mincemeat really was a popular and very common dish. So moving on to the process of creating this mock mince pie, you can see the recipe here: a cup of chopped raisins, a cup of apple, a cup of rolled crackers, 2 tablespoons of butter, a tablespoon of vinegar, a tablespoon of hot water, 2.5 tablespoons of sugar, a teaspoon each of cloves, cinnamon, nutmeg, and allspice. That's a lot of spice. So I had a couple questions when I first reviewed this. One was, what kind of apple should I use? I pretty much had to rule out a historically appropriate variety just because those are not commonly kept in grocery stores, because really what shoppers are looking for today are pretty shiny, uniform, and difficult to bruise fruit, which rules out a lot of heritage varieties. So I opted just for the stalwart Granny Smith with a nice kind of tart flavor. I also had a moment where I was very confused by rolled crackers. I thought maybe this was some historic variety of cracker I was not familiar with. And some Googling led me to realize that actually it just means roll a rolling pin over it and crush them. So I felt a little silly about that. But I chose to go with the lovely buttery and salty knockoff grocery store brand of club crackers. And for vinegar, I opted for cider vinegar, again, because that just seems sort of shaker to me, with the history of cider on our property, hard or otherwise. And then there are no baking directions: the temperature, the time, how to prepare the ingredients. It was all very open. So I turned to the 1896 Boston Cooking School cookbook and found several recipes. On the left, the English mincemeat, which leaves out the meat but still retains the suet. And that you cook for 1.5 hours before adding your spices. The mock mince recipe, there's a little more resemblance to what I used, although lots of molasses and no apple. And that one, just mix everything together and bake. And being lazy, I opted to try that. So here you can see my crackers, my apples, everything chopped up, mixed together, kind of funky looking. And the results, I haven't tasted it yet, so you will find out live in just a few moments. So with that, I will turn it over to Shirley to wrap us up for the day. Thank you.
Thank you. That was well, it's been amazing so far. All 3 of these presentations, I'm learning so much. I'm taking notes as I go. So let's get into my PowerPoint if I can. There we go. Oh my, I wish I had better news on my pie, but as you see, I've titled this The Elusive to Me Enfield Maple Pie. There we are. Let me talk first about the Shaker community here at Enfield, New Hampshire. Let's see here, I'm having trouble. There we go. The Shaker community created here at Enfield, New Hampshire looks over the wonderful Mascoma Lake. and it was the 9th of the 18 Shaker villages to be founded in the United States. At its peak in the mid-19th century, 3 families of Shakers built more than 100 buildings, including where I am now, the Great Stone Dwelling, an amazing engineering feat. The community closed in 1923 with the remaining Shakers moving to Canterbury. Today, the board, staff, volunteers, and friends of Enfield Shaker Museum preserve and interpret 10 buildings in the historic village's core, tend a Shaker herb garden, and curate a growing collection of nearly 1,500 artifacts. That large building you see at the center of this wonderful photo is the Great Stone Dwelling. There is so much we know about the Shakers at Enfield. There's also so much we do not know about the Shakers at Enfield. My office in the Great Stone Dwelling execs to our tour orientation room. In its earlier life, it was the church family's baking room. In 1853, Enfield Shaker Hervey Elkins admiringly described this chamber and the kitchen across the hallway. The kitchen is 40 feet in length and 24 in width. In this apartment where so much labor is performed, the same neatness prevails as in other parts of the edifice. Carpets protect the floors, the walls are pure white, and the insides of the cupboards and closets a sky blue. Large ranges, 20 feet in length, protected by a frame of cast iron, forms the laboratory of the kitchen. Let us cross the corridor, 10 feet in width, and enter the baking apartment. Solid masonry as high as the room, painted a sky blue, is the only object which distinguishes this room from the others. Within these beautifully polished walls are freestone ovens, 7 feet in length. Elkins recalled white bread and brown bread and sweet bread being retrieved from those huge bake ovens. But we can also imagine that pies aplenty were also baked in these enclosed fires. Pie, it seems, is also a marketable good for the Enfield Shakers. I'll let you look at something else here. This is an image that was a stereograph image that we have of the kitchen. And I would note on the left-hand side of each of these images, you might see a wonderful long-handed paddle. We do have a pie lifter in our collection, but I could see this being used for bread as well as pies. In Charles Nordhoff's 1875 book, The Communistic Societies of the United States, he notes that the Enfield Shakers put up garden seeds, made buckets and tubs, butter tubs, brooms, dry measures, gathered and dried roots and herbs for medicinal use, made maple sugar in the spring and applesauce in the winter. And in one of the families, the women prepared bread, pies, and other provisions which they sold in a neighboring manufacturing village. Nordhoff's observation about maple sugar connects us, of course, to what Amy Bess Miller and Persis Fuller called New Hampshire maple pie in their work, The Best of Shaker Cooking. Nan Munsey and Peggy Mitchell, 2 Enfield Shaker Museum volunteers, worked up both this recipe, and you see that here. Oh, somehow I've got two URLs here, so twice, same place. So Nan and Peggy worked up both this recipe and an updated version, both featured on the museum's website. Here's the newer one. The staff members tasted Peggy's version and declared it heavenly. So of course, I just had to try my hand at both versions of now Enfield maple pie. As I prepared the pie, I wondered, what did the kitchen sisters discuss as they cooked for their family? What receipts or recipes did they try? What happened when a recipe failed or food supplies were low and making do was the order of the day? Most importantly, I asked if Shakers ate pie every day and for breakfast too, like so many New Englanders did. I asked these questions because of my long interest in the history of pie. Over the state line in Vermont, Rudyard Kipling told a reporter in the 1890s that he lived on the borders of the Great Pie Belt. The Pie Belt, he said, which extends through the New England states and across northern New York. Pie is a habit all over the eastern states. In the belt, it is a debauch. Have you considered the physiological condition of a people which eats pie for breakfast, pie for dinner, and pie for supper, and takes ice water and sweet stuffs between whiles? And so this is what the Boston Globe is making fun of here. As you see on your screen, not only do we have an interesting map as a pie belt map that's also somewhat of a pie chart, but also the number of pies being eaten over a year in relationship to the Bunker Hill Monument. So of course, I was also interested in when maple pie became popular. So I ran a Google Books Ngram viewer, and you could see here that there's some interesting things going on when you look for maple pie or maple syrup pie. I didn't test for maple cream pie, but the earliest pie recipe I found in a newspaper for maple pie was 1885, and in books about 1880. There's a real bump in maple pie love between, or at least printed in newspapers and books in 1900 to a little bit after 1920. Then again, 1940, you see that big bump there, and that's due to World War II, when maple syrup and maple sugar was a wonderful replacement for white sugar, which was highly rationed during the war. And then after 1970, you see a great rise again when the technology of tubing made maple sugaring more efficient. As I've come to learn just recently, it wasn't until the American Civil War that the nation's maple syrup industry was born, with the introduction of tin for cans and metal spouts and the patenting of evaporator pans. Dairy farmers took to maple sugaring during the off-season for their own use and for extra income. The Enfield Shakers also made maple sugar, which was more efficient and long-lasting in storage as bricks. I also should note that Americans developed quite a collective sweet tooth over the course of the 19th and into the early 20th century, some 30 to 40 pounds of sugar per person in the mid-19th century to nearly 100 pounds by the turn of the 20th century. I also found, and you're going to see some wonderful maple sap buckets in our collection as we look through some of these recipes. I found a variety of different maple pie recipes, but fundamentally there are three versions. One that included lemon and or raisins, and I found those in a lot of recipe books. Another one based on maple sugar, and then maple syrup. And here's another, here's maple walnut and the maple sugar pies on here. So shaved maple sugar coming off of that brick, off of that or cone of really, really condensed maple sugar. So on to my attempt. Okay, mise en place, right? I need to tell you honestly, I failed mightily in both attempts. I tried the original maple sugar version, which is I went to King Arthur Flour and bought some maple sugar. And then I used maple syrup in the updated version. And I bought a nice new pie pan and a nice new bowl, but they didn't really do the magic they were supposed to do to make these things come out. So let me go on and show you. So I did use a candy thermometer to boil down the maple sugar for the updated recipe. And what you see on the right side is the original recipe with maple sugar, which was much lighter, and then the maple syrup recipe, much darker, of course. So I'm actually just pretty happy with my fluting there, but that's about it so far. Okay. So we had to boil the maple syrup down to 2.5 cups to 1.25 cups, registering 230 degrees on what I thought was my trusty candy thermometer, but it may not be trusty. So anyway, I had more than the requisite 1.25 cups by the time my candy thermometer registered 230 degrees. Here are the pies coming out of the oven. On the left is the original maple sugar pie, and you can't see it from this aerial view, right, the drone view, but it's really flat in the pan, really did not get up higher than a 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch. And it really sucked in the crust. So on the right is the modern version, the maple syrup version, which looks a little better, stayed true to form in some ways, but that's what happened. Nailed it not. As you can see, it did not really congeal the way it was supposed to. And yes, we did taste it. And our curator, Michael O'Connor, tasted it and said it tasted like French toast. We also tasted the original version, and it was a much lighter and, weirdly enough, less sweet taste. And I just want to remind you what the beautiful Peggy Mitchell pie looked like. And I'm nowhere near that. So this is my goal. I thought too that I would basically try another version of this, and then I decided not to. I figured if shaker your plate was an admonition to finish your food, then maybe there's a shaker your pie plate, which means you should save your ingredients to when you have somebody next to you guiding through you through the method and being able really to learn from others, which is exactly what recipes used to do, right? You're passing those down, originally called receipts, receiving from one to another in these these guarded recipes, these shared willingly or unwillingly. But what I found out is that my appreciation for Shaker women and their cookery skills grew like 1000%. In this Women's History Month, I hope we all think more about Shaker women and their work to keep Shakerism and their Shaker communities going. And I want to thank you all for listening today, and to please wear your mask, except when you're eating pie, of course, and to visit us at shakermuseum.org, where you're going to find not only these pie recipes, but many other great recipes that our volunteers are testing, updating, and sharing with all of you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you everybody for sharing all of your knowledge and your skills and all of your pies today. I think this is the time for the great pie reveal, the fabled pie reveal. So I have mine next to me. I can show you both the historic recipe and the altered recipe. So on the right, well, my right, I don't know if it's on your right or left, but this one here that I'm touching with my fork is the historic one that I showed in the presentation. On the left is the one that is a little bit altered to be a little bit more tasty to my taste. So that is my pie reveal.
Well, I will do a pie reveal. So here is the custard pie from Sister Frances, and well, from Sister Mildred, which turned out beautifully, and I'm very pleased to have it. What I really loved about it is that it sits very nicely on the plate and it looks good. The other one, that it's not actually a fail, but it's ugly. And I gotta tell you, because it bubbled up over the side, I did what I could to clean up the pie plate. It did. Whoops. It sets up nicely on the plate. I have to admit that I snuck a little bite of it. It really does taste like sugar, butter, and flour. But we have not tried the custard yet. It looked too beautiful.
All right, well, I'll reveal. Here's my, I did a little bigger than a hand pie, but I'm going to try it now. I'm gonna eat the heart out of the center, I guess.
We need a drum roll.
It looks like a bunch of raisins. Here you can see.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Very raisiny.
Mostly tastes like nutmeg.
Mm.
Although And allspice. Yep. Well, it's soft in the middle, which is good. I was worried it would just taste like leathery raisins, but yeah, it mostly tastes like eating allspice and nutmeg. But there you go.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. Love it.
Well, I'm really sorry for this, but it's the stay tuned. So I'm going to try again, and I will post it when I finally get a proper Enfield maple pie. But it did taste like French toast. I was really pleased with the parts that gelled up and everything. And heaven knows, you can't go wrong with maple, you can't go wrong with butter, and you can't go wrong with cream. Somehow I'm going to use this. And Beth DeWolf, a friend of mine in Maine, said that when I told her about this, she on Facebook, she said, Shakers would have said that pie was a bad fish caught in the gospel net. So it wasn't supposed to be, and that's it. So and then she said, put it on ice cream, which I plan to do. So
Yeah, that's a nice
Yep.
save.
never
Right,
say, never waste.
Yeah, I'm going to try my historic one. It's gotten a little cold now, so we're gonna give it a try here.
Good luck.
It's good cold. It's definitely apple forward. I would say that the rose water adds a little bit of a flowery texture taste, but the crust is really good. Tastes like pie crust, so that's
Yeah.
that's a win for me. I'll take that.
Good for you.
All right.
All right, so is that it for today? Is that all of it? Sharon, did you want to try your custard?
Yes, I really want to see
Yeah,
that.
that's
So it looks so
beautiful.
perfect.
I have to say, it's really good.
Huzzah!
And true to the Shakers, we have chickens, so it does have farm fresh eggs in it.
There we go.
We don't have a cow, so the milk came from the store. But it's sweet, but I can't tell you how happy I am how good it looked and it came out. And the next time we do this, it would be my greatest delight if we were all at the same table and we could share tastes of our pies.
Indeed.
I
Well, yeah.
would love that. That would be so much fun. I would love
It really
that.
would be. So
Have to make it happen.
Of
Yep.
course. Next pie day, we'll do it. We have one question from Rebecca on our Facebook, and she asks, and I have a question inspired by Johanna's presentation, but for anybody, have you seen any anti-spice talk in Shaker sources during the 1830s or after, when the Sylvester Graham and others were decrying spices as too stimulating?
Well, I will have to defer to more expert folks in the room because I have not personally read, but I do know at Watervliet there were many enthusiastic followers of Grahamism for a time, and that, many folks were following what I would almost classify as a vegan diet, also with no stimulants, no coffee, no chocolate, no, I guess in high school, what I would have called straight edge vegans. But I don't know if anyone else can comment more on that.
I think you got it. It was really about stimulants. So I think you've got it, Johanna.
I'm much too self-indulgent to ever attempt such a thing, but that the whole fad diet is a whole nother element. We could do a whole presentation on that.
absolutely. So
Okay, well, I think that's all of the questions that we have. But again, if you're watching this post date and you're not watching this as a live recording, feel free to also comment below or send us individual messages if you wanted to try any of our recipes that we had also attempted ourselves here today. We will be posting all of that information on our separate social media accounts and Facebooks, Twitters, Instagrams, websites. The information will be widely available to everyone, and we will be checking this thread occasionally over the next couple of weeks and so on as you have more questions or as people watch this. So I wanted to thank again everybody that was here today, anybody that was watching live, all of the presenters today, the intrepid bakers of all of our shaker museums. I think this is a huge successful Shaker Pie Day, and I am so thankful that we were included all together. We made this happen today. So thank you all.
Well, thank you. It's been a
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Thank you. So,
Yeah.
is it time to wave like a Muppet?
It is time to wave goodbye to all. So thank you everybody for stopping in today, and we'll see you soon.
Take care, everybody.
Take care.